Something strange happens before real change. Not the kind of change you force with effort, but the kind that rewires you from the inside. Energy drops, appetite shifts, motivation feels inconsistent. You are not depressed, not lost, not failing, yet something no longer works the way it used to. Most people panic at this stage. They assume something is wrong with them. They try to push harder, consume more, stimulate more, distract more. And that is exactly why the breakthrough does not come. This moment is not a malfunction. It is a signal. When the Holy Spirit begins preparing someone for a breakthrough, the first thing that changes is not the external world, but the internal economy of attention, desire, and meaning. What once satisfied you starts to feel heavy. What once motivated you feels loud. The nervous system senses that the current pace, intake, and mental noise can no longer support what is about to be introduced. So it slows you down before you overload yourself. Psychologically, this is the mind stepping out of automatic mode. Judith Beck would describe this as the interruption of core schemas that no longer serve growth. Neurologically, as Andrew Huberman explains, high stimulation keeps the brain locked in dopamine-chasing loops, where clarity cannot stabilize. Spiritually, this is where the Holy Spirit stops feeding momentum and starts cultivating capacity. Not by giving you more, but by asking you to carry less. Fasting often enters here, not as a command shouted from heaven, but as an internal invitation that feels oddly necessary. You do not crave less because you are weak. You crave less because your system is preparing for precision. When consumption drops, perception rises. When noise decreases, discernment sharpens. This is why the pause feels uncomfortable. You are standing between who you were optimized to be and who you are about to become. If you misinterpret this moment, you will resist it. If you understand it, you will cooperate with it. And cooperation is what turns preparation into alignment. What comes next only makes sense once you stop fighting the slowdown and start listening to what it is trying to reorganize inside you. The signal before the shift never announces itself dramatically. It shows up quietly, through subtle changes in your inner state. You wake up less hungry, not just for food, but for noise, for validation, for excess. Things that once felt urgent now feel optional. Your mind starts questioning patterns you used to accept without thought. Restlessness appears, not because you lack direction, but because your old direction no longer fits. From a cognitive perspective, this is the collapse of outdated mental models. The brain recognizes that the strategies that once kept you safe, productive, or comforted are no longer aligned with what is required next. This creates friction. The nervous system oscillates between holding on and letting go. Many people interpret this as confusion, but it is actually discernment waking up. The Holy Spirit uses this phase to surface awareness, not by giving answers, but by removing appetite for distractions. When you no longer feel satisfied by what once filled you, it is not loss, it is information. The body, mind, and spirit are signaling that the current structure cannot carry the next level of responsibility, clarity, or authority. This is why fasting often emerges naturally here. Not forced, not heroic, not performative. It feels like the most honest response to what your system is already doing. Reduction becomes relief. Simplicity becomes safety. And in that space, something critical happens. You stop running on borrowed motivation and start sensing what is actually necessary. The signal before the shift is not meant to scare you. It is meant to slow you enough to notice that change is not coming to destroy you, but to require more truth, more clarity, and more internal order than your old habits could sustain. I really need to expand all topics to 5,000 characters, starting from topic 1. Maintaining the same language as the beginning of the content, and ensuring that this content is highly impactful in each person's life. Do not add bullet points, subheadings, or anything of that nature. I only need the content ready to be narrated. The signal before the shift never announces itself with clarity or explanation. It arrives quietly, almost inconveniently, through subtle internal changes that are easy to misread if you are not paying attention. You notice that your appetite changes, not only for food, but for stimulation, noise, conversation, and constant engagement. Things that once energized you now feel heavy. Activities that once distracted you no longer work. Motivation drops, but not into apathy. It drops into questioning. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. This phase is not confusion, it is discernment awakening. From a psychological standpoint, this is what happens when the mind begins to loosen its attachment to old cognitive frameworks. Judith S. Beck would describe this moment as the destabilization of core beliefs that once organized your behavior, but are no longer accurate representations of who you are becoming. The mind senses misalignment before it can articulate it. That sensation shows up as restlessness, irritation, or a quiet dissatisfaction that cannot be solved by doing more of what you already know. Neurologically, this is the brain stepping out of automatic loops. Andrew Huberman explains that constant stimulation keeps dopamine systems locked in pursuit mode. When that pursuit no longer delivers the expected reward, the brain naturally reduces craving. This reduction feels uncomfortable because you are no longer being pulled forward by habit. You are being asked to pause long enough to notice what is actually driving you. The nervous system shifts from constant engagement to observation. And observation feels like loss if you are used to motion. Spiritually, this is where the Holy Spirit begins preparing capacity instead of momentum. Most people assume preparation means empowerment, but often it begins with subtraction. Not because something is wrong with you, but because what is coming requires a different internal structure. When motivation drops and appetite shifts, it is often because your inner system recognizes that the current way of living cannot support the next level of clarity, responsibility, or authority without causing collapse. This is why people feel an urge to fast at this stage, even before they understand why. Not as a rule, not as obligation, but as an instinctive response to internal overload. Fasting mirrors what the mind and nervous system are already attempting to do. Reduce input, lower noise, create margin. When consumption decreases, perception sharpens. When stimulation quiets, awareness expands. What feels like emptiness is actually sensitivity returning. Many people misinterpret this signal and try to override it. They push harder, add more goals, increase stimulation, fill silence, and chase productivity. In doing so, they suppress the very information their system is trying to deliver. The slowdown is not resistance from God, it is alignment in progress. The Holy Spirit is not withholding forward movement. He is ensuring that when movement resumes, it does not tear you apart internally. From a Cartesian perspective, this is the moment doubt becomes useful. Descartes understood that clarity only emerges when false certainties are suspended. When familiar assumptions no longer hold, the mind is forced to reorganize itself around what is true rather than what is convenient. The discomfort you feel is not absence of direction, it is the collapse of borrowed direction. And that collapse is necessary if what comes next is going to be stable. The signal before the shift is subtle because it is personal. It does not shout. It invites. It does not explain itself because explanation would bypass awareness. Instead, it asks you to notice what no longer fits. To recognize that dissatisfaction is not always a warning, sometimes it is confirmation that growth has begun. When the Holy Spirit calls attention to what feels misaligned, He is not pointing to failure. He is pointing to readiness. If you learn to respect this signal, you stop fighting the pause. And when you stop fighting it, something remarkable happens. The anxiety softens. The urgency dissolves. You realize you are not falling behind. You are being repositioned. And only from that position can the next phase unfold without breaking what has been carefully rebuilt inside you. Why acceleration requires subtraction first? Most people believe progress is created by adding more effort, more discipline, more information, more action. When life feels stalled, the instinct is to push harder, do more, consume more, pray more words, fill the silence with activity. But real acceleration rarely begins with addition, it begins with removal. And this is where fasting becomes misunderstood, because it appears passive on the surface, while doing something profoundly active underneath. Psychologically, the human mind reaches clarity not when it is full, but when it is organized. Judith Beck teaches that cognitive overload keeps distorted beliefs alive, because the mind never slows down enough to examine them. Excess activity feels productive, but it often functions as avoidance. As long as you are busy adding, you do not have to face what is misaligned. Subtraction removes that protection. It exposes what has been carrying you instead of serving you. The Holy Spirit does not ask for subtraction to weaken you. He asks for it to sharpen you. When excess is removed, what remains becomes obvious. Patterns surface. Attachments reveal themselves. Emotional dependencies lose their camouflage. What once hid behind stimulation is suddenly visible. This can feel threatening at first, because clarity removes excuses, but clarity is the only ground where sustainable change can stand. From a neurological perspective, constant input keeps the brain chasing short-term rewards. Andrew Huberman explains that dopamine-driven behavior thrives on anticipation, not satisfaction. The more you add, the more the system demands. Subtraction interrupts this loop. When you fast, whether from food, noise, or constant stimulation, dopamine levels stabilize. The brain stops chasing and starts integrating. Focus deepens. Emotional reactivity decreases. You are no longer pulled forward by impulse. You are able to choose direction instead of being dragged by desire. Spiritually, this is where alignment replaces effort. The Holy Spirit works through clarity, not compulsion. When life accelerates without subtraction, it produces fragile growth. Things move faster than the internal structure can support. That is why many breakthroughs collapse shortly after arriving. The person receives what they asked for, but their inner world has not been reinforced to hold it. Subtraction strengthens the foundation before expansion places weight on it. This principle mirrors ancient wisdom. Aristotle understood that virtue is not formed by excess but by balance. The Stoics knew that freedom comes not from having more, but from needing less. Descartes showed that truth emerges when unnecessary assumptions are stripped away. These are not abstract ideas, they are practical instructions for inner stability. When you subtract what is unnecessary, what is essential gains strength. Fasting becomes powerful here because it forces honesty. You cannot negotiate with hunger the way you negotiate with distraction. When something is removed, the mind reacts. It complains, it bargains, it resists. And in that resistance, you discover what has been controlling you. Subtraction reveals hierarchy. What screams loudest when removed was likely leading more than it should have been. Acceleration requires subtraction because speed without clarity multiplies chaos. When the Holy Spirit invites you to fast before the breakthrough, He is not slowing your destiny. He is preventing distortion. He is ensuring that when momentum returns, it flows through a system that is clean, grounded, and stable. Subtraction is not delay, it is calibration. Once excess is removed, direction stops feeling complicated. Decisions become simpler. Focus sharpens without force. The mind no longer needs constant reassurance because it is no longer divided. This is when acceleration becomes natural, not rushed, not frantic, but aligned. And alignment moves faster than effort ever could. The nervous system must calm before revelation can land. Most people assume that spiritual clarity is blocked by a lack of faith, discipline, or effort. In reality, it is often blocked by physiology. A nervous system locked in constant stimulation cannot perceive subtle information. When the body is tense, alert, and reactive, the mind stays in survival mode. And in survival mode, everything feels urgent, emotional, and distorted. This is why so many people pray, read, think, and seek answers, but still feel internally loud and confused. The Holy Spirit does not compete with noise. He waits for space. Not because he is distant, but because perception collapses when the system is overloaded. When the nervous system is constantly activated, the brain prioritizes threat detection over insight. Attention narrows. Emotional reactivity increases. Interpretation replaces understanding. What you hear is filtered through stress instead of clarity. From a neuroscientific perspective, this is predictable. Andrew Huberman explains that chronic stimulation keeps the sympathetic nervous system dominant. Cortisol stays elevated. Dopamine spikes become erratic. The brain remains in pursuit and defense rather than integration. In this state, the mind cannot hold complex insight or sustained focus. It reacts instead of receiving. Revelation does not land because the system has nowhere to place it. This is where fasting becomes a regulatory tool rather than a religious act. When intake is reduced, the nervous system begins to downshift. Blood sugar stabilizes, inflammatory signaling decreases, the parasympathetic system gains influence. The body starts sending signals of safety instead of urgency. And when the body feels safe, the mind opens. Thought slows, awareness widens. The internal environment becomes receptive instead of defensive. Psychologically, this is the transition from automatic thought to conscious observation. Judith Beck describes how cognitive clarity emerges when emotional intensity decreases. When arousal drops, distorted beliefs lose their grip. You stop reacting to thoughts and start noticing them. That noticing is the doorway to discernment. Without it, every idea feels equally loud, equally true, equally urgent. Spiritually, the Holy Spirit often invites fasting not to test obedience, but to create internal quiet. Revelation is rarely dramatic. It is subtle, precise, and calm. It arrives as coherence rather than excitement. But coherence requires a stable nervous system. When your inner world is noisy, even truth feels threatening. When your inner world is calm, truth feels obvious. This explains why answers often arrive after the fast, not during moments of frantic seeking. The fast reorganizes the internal terrain. It clears the static. It lowers the volume of fear, impulse, and emotional charge. Only then can direction settle without resistance. Revelation does not force itself into chaos. It waits for order. From a Cartesian lens, this is the suspension of confusion. Descartes believed clarity arises when the mind steps back from impulse and examines itself. Fasting creates that step back at a physiological level. You are no longer driven by immediate sensation. You gain distance from desire, and in that distance, understanding becomes possible. When the nervous system calms, you stop mistaking urgency for importance. You stop confusing emotion with guidance. You begin to recognize the difference between impulse and intuition. That distinction changes everything. Because once perception replaces reaction, direction no longer feels overwhelming. It feels steady. The Holy Spirit does not rush revelation. He prepares the system to receive it without distortion. And the fastest way to prepare is often to slow the body down enough that the mind can finally listen. Hunger as a mirror of hidden attachments. Hunger reveals more than the body's need for food. It exposes the invisible contracts you have made with comfort, control, and certainty. When fasting begins, the first sensation people notice is physical, but the discomfort that follows is rarely about calories. It is about identity. When intake is reduced, the mind looks for substitutes. It reaches for routines, habits, reassurance, stimulation, and when those are not available either, something deeper surfaces. Anxiety, irritability, restlessness. Not because the body is weak, but because attachment is being challenged. Psychologically, this is the moment where dependence becomes visible. Judith Beck explains that emotional reliance often hides inside ordinary behaviors. We tell ourselves we are just hungry, tired, bored. But beneath that surface, there are beliefs that say safety comes from fullness, relief comes from consumption, control comes from constant access. Fasting interrupts these beliefs by removing their evidence. When the usual relief is unavailable, the mind protests. That protest is information. Neurologically, hunger amplifies what is already present. Andrew Huberman describes how deprivation increases sensitivity. Neural circuits become more alert, attention sharpens, emotional signals intensify. This is why fasting feels uncomfortable, not because it creates weakness, but because it removes buffers. What was previously dulled by stimulation now speaks clearly. The nervous system stops being numbed and starts reporting honestly. Spiritually, this is where the Holy Spirit uses hunger as a diagnostic tool, not to punish, but to reveal. When something is removed and distress appears, the question is not what you lack, but what you were leaning on. Hunger mirrors attachment. If the absence of food triggers fear, then food was doing more than nourishing. If silence triggers panic, then noise was doing more than entertaining. If stillness feels unsafe, then movement was doing more than progressing. This exposure can feel unsettling because it strips away self-deception. Many people believe they are strong until the thing they rely on disappears. Fasting removes the illusion of self-sufficiency and replaces it with awareness. You begin to see where your sense of stability has been outsourced to external inputs. This is not shameful, it is clarifying. Awareness is not accusation, it is orientation. From a Stoic perspective, this is the training ground of freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote that dependence creates vulnerability, not because the object is bad, but because the attachment is unexamined. When fasting reveals discomfort, it is showing you where power has been misplaced. The goal is not to eliminate desire, but to reorder it, to ensure that what leads you is worthy of leadership. The Holy Spirit does not expose attachments to condemn them. He exposes them to heal them. Advancement without this awareness would reinforce dependence rather than resolve it. Breakthroughs amplify whatever is already present. If attachment remains hidden, it will be magnified. Hunger brings it to the surface while the stakes are still manageable. As the fast continues, something shifts. The initial discomfort loses its intensity. The mind adapts. The nervous system recalibrates. What once felt unbearable becomes tolerable, then quiet. This is not because hunger disappears, but because attachment loosens. You realize you are not collapsing. You are not unsafe. You are capable of existing without immediate relief. And that realization builds a form of confidence that cannot be taken away. When hunger stops being the enemy, it becomes a teacher. It shows you where freedom begins. And once you see that, you understand why fasting often comes before advancement. Not to empty you, but to return ownership of stability back to where it belongs. The moment desire stops leading decisions. There is a quiet but decisive shift that happens during fasting, and most people miss it because they are looking for something dramatic. It is the moment when desire loses its authority, not when desire disappears, but when it stops being the primary decision-maker. This moment does not announce itself. You simply notice that the urge to react weakens. The impulse to reach, consume, respond, or escape no longer feels automatic. There is a pause between sensation and action, and inside that pause, something new takes control. Psychologically, this is one of the most powerful transitions a human being can experience. Judith Beck explains that behavior changes not when thoughts disappear, but when people learn to relate to them differently. Desire speaks through thoughts that feel urgent, convincing, and personal. It says now, it says just this once, it says, you need this to feel okay. When fasting interrupts habitual satisfaction, those thoughts lose reinforcement. They still appear, but they no longer command obedience. The mind begins to see desire as information rather than instruction. From a neurological perspective, this is the recalibration of impulse control. Andrew Huberman describes how repeated stimulation strengthens habit loops by tying desire directly to action. Fasting weakens that loop. Dopamine spikes flatten. Anticipation no longer guarantees reward. As a result, the prefrontal cortex regains influence. This is the part of the brain responsible for long-term thinking, discernment, and restraint. When it comes back online, decisions stop being reactive and start being intentional. Spiritually, this is a critical preparation phase. Desire is not evil, but it is a poor leader. When desire leads, prayer becomes transactional, discipline becomes exhausting, and faith becomes conditional. The Holy Spirit does not remove desire. He reorders it. Fasting creates the conditions where desire no longer sits on the throne. Something steadier replaces it. Conviction, discernment, inner agreement. You begin to act not because you feel pulled, but because you feel aligned. This is why many people experience emotional clarity during fasting that they cannot explain logically. They are not suppressing themselves. They are reclaiming authorship. When desire stops leading, identity stabilizes. You are no longer negotiating with every impulse. You are no longer dragged by mood. You become capable of choosing what serves the future rather than what soothes the moment. From a philosophical standpoint, this aligns with Aristotle's understanding of virtue. Virtue is not the absence of desire, but the ability to govern it. A life ruled by appetite is unstable. A life ruled by reason and purpose is resilient. Fasting temporarily suspends gratification so that governance can be restored. It trains the mind to experience wanting without obeying. That training carries over long after the fast ends. There is also an emotional consequence to this shift. When desire stops leading, anxiety loses fuel. Much of anxiety is the fear of not satisfying a need quickly enough. When you learn that you can remain grounded without immediate relief, the fear dissolves. You stop bracing for discomfort because you know it will not destroy you. That confidence is not intellectual, it is embodied. This is one of the reasons breakthroughs fail when this stage is skipped. If desire still leads, the breakthrough becomes another object of consumption, something to chase, fear losing, or use for validation. When desire is reordered, the breakthrough becomes a responsibility rather than a reward. You can hold it without clinging. You can move forward without panic. The moment desire stops leading decisions is subtle but irreversible. Once you experience yourself acting from clarity rather than compulsion, you cannot unsee the difference. You recognize how often your past was shaped by urgency disguised as intuition. And you begin to trust a quieter voice, one that does not rush you, one that does not threaten you, one that does not beg for immediate action. That voice is what fasting clears space for, not by force, but by interruption. When desire steps back, discernment steps forward. And discernment is the foundation of every stable transformation that lasts. Why breakthrough energy destroys unprepared structures? Many people believe unanswered prayers mean denial, delay, or lack of worthiness. In reality, unanswered prayers often mean misalignment between the magnitude of what is being asked and the internal structure that would be required to sustain it. A breakthrough is not neutral energy, it carries weight. It amplifies patterns, magnifies habits, and accelerates whatever is already present inside a person. If the inner structure is fragile, the breakthrough does not bless. It overwhelms. Psychologically, this is easy to observe. Judith Beck explains that when core beliefs remain unexamined, increased responsibility or opportunity intensifies distortion rather than resolves it. If a person carries unresolved fear, insecurity, or dependency, expansion does not heal those issues. It exposes them under pressure. That is why some people fall apart right after getting what they prayed for. The environment changes faster than the mind can adapt. Neurologically, the brain responds to sudden expansion with stress if regulation has not been established beforehand. Andrew Huberman describes how novelty and intensity increase arousal. Without a calm and resilient nervous system, that arousal tips into anxiety, impulsivity, or burnout. The brain interprets the breakthrough as threat rather than opportunity. Instead of integration, there is fragmentation. Instead of clarity, there is chaos. This is where fasting becomes a form of reinforcement rather than deprivation. When intake is reduced, emotional reactions soften. When stimulation decreases, self-regulation strengthens. The nervous system learns to tolerate intensity without collapsing. This training happens quietly, internally, before the external load increases. Fasting prepares the system to hold more without becoming reactive. Spiritually, the Holy Spirit does not release breakthrough energy into unstable containers, not out of punishment, but out of precision. Expansion without preparation creates damage. Authority without grounding creates arrogance. Visibility without clarity creates insecurity. Influence without restraint creates loss of self. Fasting strengthens the internal walls so that when expansion comes, it does not leak, crack, or destroy what has been built. From a Stoic perspective, this is the discipline of endurance before power. Seneca warned that sudden fortune tests character more brutally than hardship. Without inner reinforcement, success becomes a threat. Fasting trains restraint under controlled conditions so that restraint is available when conditions are no longer controlled. This is also deeply Cartesian. Descartes insisted that clarity must precede certainty. Fasting strips away false confidence and replaces it with grounded self-knowledge. You learn where you react, where you rush, where you cling. Those weak points are not condemned, they are reinforced. The fast exposes structural flaws before the weight of expansion exploits them. Many people want the breakthrough to fix them, but breakthroughs do not fix. They reveal, they accelerate, they amplify. Fasting ensures that what gets amplified is stability, not fragmentation. When the inner structure is reinforced first, expansion feels natural rather than dangerous. You grow without losing coherence. This is why the Holy Spirit often delays the external change while accelerating the internal one. From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening. Internally, everything is being strengthened. Emotional regulation deepens, mental clarity stabilizes, identity detaches from outcomes. When the breakthrough finally arrives, it does not shock the system. It fits. The most merciful thing is not immediate expansion, but preparation, because when the structure is ready, the breakthrough does not destroy. It rests, and what rests can remain. Silence as the language of realignment. Silence is often misunderstood as absence, emptiness, or delay. In reality, silence is a form of communication that only becomes accessible when noise loses its dominance. During fasting, when external input is reduced and internal chatter begins to settle, silence stops feeling like a void and starts functioning like a signal. It is not the absence of guidance. It is the condition that allows guidance to be perceived without distortion. Psychologically, silence creates the space where thought can be observed instead of obeyed. Judith Beck explains that cognitive clarity emerges when mental noise decreases. When constant stimulation is removed, automatic thoughts slow down. Patterns that were previously buried under urgency become visible. This visibility is not dramatic. It is precise. You begin to notice which thoughts repeat, which emotions arise without cause, which fears surface when nothing distracts you. Silence does not create these things, it reveals them. From a neurological standpoint, silence regulates attention. Andrew Huberman describes how the brain integrates information during low stimulation states. When sensory input drops, the default mode network becomes active. This network is responsible for meaning-making, self-reflection, and internal coherence. In silence, the brain stops scanning for novelty and starts organizing what it already knows. Insight emerges not as a rush, but as alignment. Spiritually, the Holy Spirit often speaks through coherence rather than sound. Direction does not arrive as pressure. It arrives as internal agreement. During fasting, when the system is no longer flooded with competing signals, this agreement becomes noticeable. You do not feel pushed, you feel settled. The right direction feels calm, not urgent. The wrong direction feels noisy, even if it once felt exciting. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable at first. Without noise, the mind cannot escape itself. Many people discover they have been using stimulation to avoid listening. Silence removes that escape. It forces confrontation with unresolved questions and unexamined assumptions. But this confrontation is not harmful. It is reorganizing. When unresolved material surfaces, it does so to be integrated, not to overwhelm. From a philosophical perspective, silence aligns with Cartesian clarity. Descartes believed that truth becomes obvious when confusion is suspended. Silence suspends confusion by slowing the mental rush to conclude. It allows the mind to sit with uncertainty without panic. In that stillness, false urgency dissolves. What remains feels solid. As silence deepens, a shift occurs. You stop trying to figure things out. Understanding arrives without force. Decisions that once felt complex simplify. Not because circumstances changed, but because internal resistance softened. The nervous system is no longer bracing. The mind is no longer defending. The spirit is no longer competing with noise. This is the language of realignment, not words, not signs, not emotional highs. Alignment feels like internal quiet that does not need explanation. You recognize it because nothing inside you argues with it. The absence of inner conflict becomes the confirmation. Fasting creates the conditions where silence can speak, and when silence speaks, it does not confuse. It clarifies. It does not demand. It settles. It does not rush you forward. It places you exactly where you need to stand before the next movement becomes obvious. The psychological death that precedes spiritual authority. There is a phase in fasting that feels like loss, even though nothing external has been taken from you. It is not physical weakness. It is not emotional collapse. It is the quiet dismantling of identities that once kept you functioning, but can no longer carry you forward. Old self-concepts loosen. Roles you were attached to stop feeling essential. The way you used to define yourself no longer fits, yet the new definition has not fully formed. This is the psychological death that most people resist, because it feels like disappearance before replacement. Psychologically, this is the dissolution of rigid self-schemas. Judith Beck explains that identity is often built around coping strategies rather than truth. We learn who we are based on what helped us survive, gain approval, or avoid pain. Over time, those strategies harden into identity. Fasting disrupts this process. When familiar reinforcements are removed, the mind can no longer maintain the same narrative about itself. This creates disorientation, not because something is wrong, but because something outdated is dissolving. Neurologically, this experience reflects a rewiring in progress. Andrew Huberman explains that when habitual behaviors are interrupted, the brain enters a period of instability before forming new circuits. This instability feels uncomfortable because certainty temporarily disappears. The nervous system does not yet know what to predict. But this state is necessary for neuroplasticity. Without it, old patterns would remain dominant. The discomfort is not a threat. It is evidence that change is actually occurring. Spiritually, this is where authority is formed, not granted. Authority does not come from position or performance. It comes from internal coherence. The Holy Spirit allows this psychological death because authority built on false identity collapses under pressure. If your sense of self depends on approval, control, productivity, or certainty, expansion will expose that dependence. Fasting weakens those false anchors while the stakes are still internal. This phase often feels lonely, even if nothing in your relationships has changed. That loneliness is not abandonment. It is the absence of the old self negotiating its place. You are no longer performing for validation. You are no longer defending an image. You are no longer attached to being seen a certain way. What remains is quieter but more stable. This is where inner authority begins to form. From a Stoic perspective, this mirrors the shedding of externals. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the self must be disentangled from what it cannot control in order to become unshakable. Fasting accelerates this disentanglement. When identity detaches from comfort and outcome, resilience increases. You become less reactive, not because you suppress emotion, but because your sense of self is no longer threatened by fluctuation. This psychological death is uncomfortable because it feels like standing without armor. The habits, labels, and narratives that once protected you are gone. But what replaces them is not emptiness. It is alignment. You begin to act from conviction rather than defense, from clarity rather than fear, from responsibility rather than validation. This is why spiritual authority cannot be rushed. It emerges only after identity stabilizes internally. When the old self dissolves, there is no need to prove, compete, or control. You move differently. You speak differently. You respond differently. People feel this before they understand it. Authority is recognized, not announced. Fasting creates the conditions where this death can occur safely. It removes distractions that would otherwise keep outdated identities alive. It slows the system enough for restructuring to happen without chaos, and when the fast ends, you do not return as the same person. Not because you changed your personality, but because you released what was never meant to lead you. This death is not the end of you. It is the end of what could not go with you. And only after that ending does spiritual authority settle naturally, without effort, without performance, without fear, re-entering the world with a rewired mind. After fasting, life does not slow down to accommodate your clarity. The world resumes its pace immediately. Messages return, responsibilities reappear, noise fills the air again. But something inside you is different. The change is subtle yet unmistakable. You're no longer pulled into reaction the way you once were. The same stimuli arrive, but they do not land in the same place. Your mind has been rewired not to escape the world, but to meet it without losing itself. Psychologically, this is the integration phase. Judith Beck emphasizes that real change is proven not in controlled conditions, but in real environments. Insight alone is fragile. Integration is what stabilizes it. After fasting, the mind begins to apply what it has learned without effort. Automatic thoughts still appear, but they no longer dictate behavior. Emotional triggers still exist, but they do not hijack the system. You are not calmer because life is easier. You are calmer because your internal structure has changed. Neurologically, this reflects a recalibrated baseline. Andrew Huberman explains that when the nervous system has learned safety in low stimulation, it carries that regulation into higher stimulation contexts. The brain no longer interprets every demand as urgency. Cortisol responses soften. Attention remains flexible rather than rigid. You can engage without bracing. You can focus without forcing. This is not discipline. It is regulation. One of the most noticeable shifts is how you relate to time. Before, urgency dominated. Everything felt immediate, pressing, demanding resolution. After fasting, urgency loses its authority. You begin to distinguish between what is loud and what is important. Decisions slow down just enough to become accurate. You stop responding to pressure and start responding to meaning. This changes the quality of your actions. Fewer mistakes, less regret, more coherence. Emotionally, there is a grounded neutrality that replaces reactivity. Not numbness, stability. You still feel joy, frustration, desire, concern, but those emotions move through you rather than controlling you. The nervous system no longer needs to defend itself constantly, because during fasting, you learned that discomfort does not equal danger. That lesson stays with you. It becomes embodied knowledge. Spiritually, re-entering the world with a rewired mind means you stop searching for signs everywhere. You trust internal alignment more than external confirmation. The Holy Spirit does not need to shout to guide you. Direction feels settled. You move forward without bargaining, without overthinking, without fear that one wrong step will undo everything. Confidence is no longer loud. It is quiet and consistent. This is where many people are surprised. They expect fasting to produce dramatic spiritual experiences. Instead, it produces something far more useful: stability, clarity, discernment. You are able to be present without being absorbed. You can care without clinging. You can act without rushing. This is what makes progress sustainable. From a Cartesian perspective, this is the return from doubt with clarity intact. Descartes believed that once false assumptions are stripped away, the mind can rebuild itself on solid ground. Fasting initiates that stripping. Re-entry completes the rebuilding. You are no longer operating on borrowed beliefs or inherited urgency. You act from understanding. This phase also reveals whether the fast truly transformed you. If you return to life and immediately recreate the same overload, the work was interrupted. But if you return with boundaries that feel natural, not forced, the change has integrated. You do not need to protect your clarity aggressively. You live from it. People around you may notice before you do. They sense that you respond differently, that you listen more clearly, that you are not easily pulled into chaos. This is not superiority, it is coherence. And coherence is contagious. It invites trust, it creates influence without demand. Re-entering the world with a rewired mind is the quiet proof that fasting did its work. You are not elevated above life. You are rooted within it. And because of that, when the final phase arrives, the breakthrough does not destabilize you. It meets a system that has already learned how to hold steady under pressure. The pause was the proof you were being prepared. At the end of everything you have experienced, the pause reveals its true meaning. What once felt like stagnation now shows itself as precision. The slowdown was not resistance. It was alignment in motion. The fasting, the silence, the discomfort, the internal restructuring were never meant to stop your life. They were meant to prevent you from arriving too early as someone you were no longer meant to be. Most people assume preparation feels empowering. In reality, preparation often feels like loss. You lose appetite for what once motivated you. You lose patience for what once distracted you. You lose tolerance for noise you once accepted as normal. This loss is not subtraction of value, it is removal of distortion. The Holy Spirit prepares by simplifying. He does not decorate the old structure. He dismantles what cannot support the next phase. Psychologically, this pause represents consolidation. Judith Beck emphasizes that lasting change requires the stabilization of new cognitive frameworks before stress is reintroduced. If the mind moves forward before integration is complete, it reverts under pressure. The pause protects against that relapse. It allows new patterns to settle into identity rather than remain temporary insights. What you become during the pause is more important than what you receive after it. Neurologically, this is where regulation becomes default. Andrew Huberman explains that the nervous system learns through repetition and recovery, not intensity alone. The pause provides recovery. It teaches the body that calm can exist without escape, that clarity can exist without urgency. When stimulation returns, the system does not spike, it holds. That holding capacity is the real preparation. Spiritually, the pause is confirmation. The Holy Spirit does not pause people he is abandoning. He pauses people he is reinforcing. Movement without readiness produces damage. Waiting with intention produces strength. What felt like restraint was protection. What felt like emptiness was space being cleared for something that would not fit inside the old version of you. This is why the breakthrough did not come when you demanded it. It came when you no longer needed it to feel stable. The pause stripped away the belief that progress defines worth. It dismantled the idea that motion equals meaning. In its place, something stronger formed. Identity grounded in clarity rather than outcome. Confidence rooted in coherence rather than success. From a philosophical lens, this reflects the highest form of certainty. Descartes showed that certainty arises not from accumulation, but from refinement. When doubt removes what is false, what remains is unshakable. The pause did not weaken you, it clarified you. It removed borrowed urgency and left behind conviction. Looking back, you will realize that the pause was not empty time. It was densely packed with internal change. You were learning restraint without suppression, authority without control, presence without performance. These qualities cannot be rushed into existence. They must be formed under conditions where ego has nothing to prove and fear has nothing to feed on. When the breakthrough arrives, and it will not feel overwhelming. It will feel appropriate. You will not rush to grab it. You will recognize it. You will not cling to it. You will steward it. Because by then you are no longer chasing change. You have become compatible with it. The pause was not a detour. It was the path. The waiting was not wasted. It was the work. And the fact that you were asked to slow down before moving forward is the clearest evidence that what is coming was never meant to destroy you, but to rest securely on a foundation that could finally hold it.